This video is for teachers who are looking for an overview of the Unit 3 assessment, which occurs on days 26 to 28, and is about the students using documents to construct a historical narrative, evaluating the 55 years between 1865 and 1920 as either one of progress or decline for American democracy. As presented in this lesson, this assessment is scheduled to be completed over the course of 3 days, and one day is for really breaking down the task. Another is for doing the pre-writing and document analysis, and the third day is for the actual writing of the narrative itself. However, depending on the dynamics of your class and the needs of your students, this timeline can either be extended or condensed. Day one starts with an introductory activity meant to access the students' prior knowledge about stories. In the guidance for instruction slide, it does mention that after having the students share, either verbally by unmuting or typing via the chat, the teacher should frame the goals of this assessment and remind the students of their work with historical narratives from earlier in the unit. If your students require a more in-depth reminder about historical narratives or how they're connected to these three questions, I recommend doing the following. First, you could have them review the historical narrative tool, and instead of taking time to look through the whole thing, you might just want to draw their attention to the checklist that appears at the end on the second page. And second, if students require a more thorough breakdown, there is also a video that was made that you can refer them to. Also, after facilitating a discussion where students shared their responses to these three questions, you also might want to ensure that your students clearly see the connection between these and the assessment they're about to do. And you might follow up with questions about how historical narratives are either similar or different to some of the responses they just shared about stories. Since the first day's goal is really about having them fully understand the task, adding questions such as this might be really beneficial to them. Once you are satisfied the students have a solid starting point about historical narratives, move ahead to this slide, and this one really does set up the independent work, which is to break down the overview and the task, including parts 1 and 2. And as we can see here on the first slide of their independent work, they are going to be doing multiple reads of the task. And the first time that they do this, they're going to highlight the parts for what they need to know and also for what they need to do. Then, the second time they read the task, they annotate using these prompts as a guide. And that's going to prepare them for the say something activity that follows. Again, depending on the unique needs of your students, you may encourage students to respond to each other or direct any questions or misunderstandings they have towards you. For students who are completing this day asynchronously, it does say in the guidance for instruction slide that you can set it up so they still highlight the no's and the do's, just like the synchronous students. But you may also want to find a way for them to pose questions, comments, or clarifying remarks more directly to you, since it would be beneficial for them to get your response before starting the assessment. Since these students cannot benefit from you responding in real time, you may put extra emphasis on reviewing their responses to the independent work, as well as their response to the wrap-up question. However, another option would be for you to instruct students to tag you on a question or comment which they leave, and that will proactively alert you to their question. And it may be a more efficient strategy if you have a lot of students or not a lot of time to individually review all the wrap-up responses. And all they would need to do is highlight the text, leave a comment, and as they're filling it out, let's say this is their question, what should the intro to my historical narrative include? And they simply write your email address and click comment. I am now going to bring up the student-facing assignment, and I just want to highlight some areas where I anticipate my own students benefiting from a little clarification or elaboration. And first, I would remind the students that during this 55-year time period, they studied 3 eras. And after reviewing their evidence, they may determine that some of these eras demonstrated progress and others declined, meaning they may determine that these two things coexisted. And that is fine. In fact, if they elaborate on that idea, it may move them up to exceeding standards in some of the categories. However, like it says here, eventually they are going to have to establish their overall evaluation for this time period as being either one of progress or one of decline. Second, after selecting one document from each period that supports their progress or decline labeling, they should use that fourth document to support their overall designation of this time period. Third, walk the students through what their introductory paragraph should entail by elaborating and even providing an example, if necessary, about what is meant by inherent values, contextualization, and just a reminder that they have to articulate their overall narrative as being one of either progress or decline for this time period. And fourth, I know the lesson calls for students to review the rubric on the third day as a checklist just prior to their submission. And also, I know that rubrics are very word dense and students may be already busy thinking ahead to about what they're actually going to write. However, I would at least walk them through the categories and learning targets they are going to be assessed on, and you can see them here in the column on the left. And if they want to, they can go through on their own time and distinguish the nuance about what makes an approaching versus meeting versus an exceeding standards what they are. But the entire class should at least be aware of the broad categories before beginning the writing process. Day 2 starts with a bridge from the previous lesson. The answers to all of these questions are pertinent to the students working on their narratives. So one option to ensure that all 4 are covered would be for you to assign specific questions to select students or student groups. And you may either do this randomly or more strategically if you know that some students would benefit from considering one in particular. From there, students are given time to peruse their work from the unit to guide their analysis of this time period. At this point, it may be beneficial to remind them again of the suggested role of the fourth document. Also, for each of the 3 eras that this time period was broken into, Reconstruction, the Gilded Age, and the Progressive Era, the students ended most lessons by answering a wrap-up question, asking them to reflect on whether that lesson's sources suggested progress or decline. If possible, a good starting point for students might be to review their responses to these, which would assist them in forming their evaluation of each time period, and it would also give them some direction as to which supporting document might be ideal. Because we want them spending the bulk of their time engaging with the sources they select, you may find it useful to streamline the process by creating a hyperlinked index of each source and its associated time period. And I started a sample here. Just to be clear, doing so will not help the students make their determinations, just merely provide something similar to almost like a table of contents to help them navigate all these sources more efficiently. Also, the titles may trigger their memories, which would also speed up the process. Each document they ultimately select has 7 guiding prompts that go with it in the graphic organizer, which I just pulled up right here. And you may want to point out to students where they will utilize various skills from this unit, as well as a reminder of why they are relevant to this project. And in particular, I'm thinking about reminding my students the importance of perspective, historical empathy, and ultimately progress or decline as they are doing the pre-writing for their historical narrative. Day 2 ends with the students anticipating what they will do in the next class, and day 3 is dedicated to the writing of the narrative. And this task sheet that appears after the graphic organizer is really great because it not only explains exactly what it is the students have to do, but it also provides a breakdown of what a reminder of what the introduction is going to look like, as well as what the components of the body paragraphs will be. And this could definitely be used as an outline or even a checklist for the students to use prior to submission.